Hello, good afternoon. Welcome to BBC Newsline. A report has found that an army spy operating at the heart of the IRA during the Troubles probably cost more lives than he saved. Operation Kenova took 7 years to examine the activities of the agent known as Stakeknife. He was Belfast man Freddie Scappaticci. The agent has been linked to multiple murders. The Kenova report states that speculation that Stakeknife saved countless or even hundreds of lives is wrong. It puts the figure between the high single or low double figures. However, the agent was linked to at least 14 murders. Well, our crime and justice correspondent Julian O'Neill joins me now live from the Stormont Hotel, where our press conference has been held there this morning. So what are the main and significant findings then, Julian?
Well, this was a highly anticipated, long-awaited report. It has been a £40 million, 7-year investigation. It described Stakeknife as a valuable agent who provided high-value information on the provisional IRA to the army and higher up the state intelligence chain. But as you say, there was an assessment of his value as an agent in terms of lives lost and lives saved. It put the number of lives that he saved in single figures, high single figures or low double figures, but as you say, he himself was linked to 14 murders, and the IRA's internal security unit in which he worked countless more. John Boucher gave a press conference here which lasted some length of time, and during that press conference he addressed the idea that somehow Stakeknife had enjoyed fable status as a golden egg asset who had saved countless, indeed maybe even hundreds of lives. He said that simply isn't true.
The claims about countless lives being saved by Stakeknife are inherently implausible and should have rung further alarm bells. Any serious security and intelligence professional hearing an agent being likened to the goose that laid the golden eggs, as Stakeknife was, should be on the alert, not least because the comparison is rooted in fables and fairy tales.
John Boucher there, and he also mentioned apologies, Julian. What exactly did he say about that?
That's right. Some of these murders were preventable, but security forces refused to intervene to save people in order to protect Stakeknife. Now, on that basis, John Boucher says the government should apologise. He also wants an apology from the Republican movement on behalf of the IRA for their conduct and their execution, as they saw it, of informers and alleged informers. But interestingly, I thought that in respect of the government apology, he felt that this should come at the very highest level.
The United Kingdom government should apologise to the Kenova families for the failures of the security forces to protect the lives of their loved ones, investigate the crimes committed against them, and treat them with the fairness, compassion, respect and transparency that they deserved. The former Prime Minister Lord Cameron issued public apologies in the wake of the Bloody Sunday and Pat Finucane reports. In my view, the same thing should happen here.
A couple of other things worth a mention. The report was unable to officially name Stakeknife as real man Freddie Scappaticci because the government requested that that was not allowed. John Boucher wants to challenge that and hopes that that decision can be made in time for the final report on the Stakeknife case to be delivered later this year. We did, shortly after the press conference, get a response from the Northern Ireland office. Chris Heaton-Harris, the Secretary of State, no apology in his statement. He said that's because court cases are still ongoing. He also said that I want to put on record again my deepest sympathy with all the families who lost loved ones during the Troubles, including as a result of the actions of the Provisional IRA.
Now, a short time ago, Declan Harvey spoke to John Boucher and asked him what value his report has without any prosecutions or agents being named.
I think what this report does is set out accurately, honestly, what was going on at the time. And these families You have to understand, I've been trying to get these answers for so long, and they've met with such obstruction.
Back in 2018, you said there is no reason why they can't get justice. You said there is no reason why an investigation can't find the truth about how, where, and who was responsible for the death of their loved ones. Did you overpromise?
No, that's what's happened. So we've got that information. Those families are being given information, but I'm not going to give the media information about what happened in these cases, because it's for those families. I didn't do this investigation for the media. I didn't do it for anybody else other than those families. And it's those families that will get the information about what occurred in those cases.
Was Freddie Scappaticci Stakeknife?
I've answered that question as best as I can. I made it very clear in the press conference this morning. Until the government give clearance for that information to be given, and I've made it very clear today that that clearance should be given, I believe in due process and doing things properly. Let's remember, these families never got due process. They never got proper investigations at the time. We're applying due process now on all sides.
But do the families know if Freddie Scappaticci was Stakeknife?
A lot of the families have got a very good understanding about who Stakeknife was.
I understand that, but has Operation Kenova confirmed to the families the identity of Stakeknife?
I'm not talking to you about the conversations I've had with families. Today is about the high-level thematic findings of that report. I'm not going to speak to the media about conversations I have with families.
Well, as was said inside, there is an overwhelming public interest in all this. I just wonder, have you been gagged?
Nobody would gag me, I can assure you of that.
John Boucher speaking just a short time ago to Declan Harvey. Well, a solicitor of some of the families is holding a press conference in Belfast City Centre this lunchtime. Let's go live to that now.
This report has delivered for them. The level of information and detail imparted in the report certainly meets expectations. For others, it is a case of what might have been, and it's somewhat a halfway house on justice. We say this because, given the sheer volume of evidence and information, albeit much of which is of an evidential intelligence nature, there nevertheless was an expectation that the PPS could direct prosecutions against those involved in or directing the killings. That disappointment has been compounded by the specific failure to direct prosecutions against former members of the security and intelligence services. Families know or have a suspicion as to who was involved in the IRA killing of their family member. They were not particularly interested in prosecutions against IRA foot soldiers who were ordered directly or indirectly to kill. Their focus has been on the identity of those handlers and others who facilitated and protected Fred Scappaticci and possibly others from criminal detection. Some families rightly reserve their annoyance for the PPS decision-making. Kenova investigators were faced with logistical problems in terms of access to evidence which ought to have been retained but was in fact destroyed or lost. This is particularly so when you look at the records of the Task Coordinating Group, TCG. The industrial destruction of TCG-based material and other records served to undermine the work of Kenova at times, and that served to create further delay. This systemic culling of material chimes with the obstacles put in place of Sir John Stevens whenever he commenced his work into investigating loyalist state collusion back in the 1990s. MI5 and other authorities based in Whitehall fortunately retained many records, which, had they not been made available, would certainly have meant that the Kenova investigation would have concluded a number of years ago. Today's report presents as a damning indictment on the state. The staggering takeaway message is that the state could have and should have intervened to save lives. That this didn't happen is legally and morally reprehensible. The findings point to the existence of a macabre joint enterprise between the Force Research Unit, FRU, the TCG, and those who actually fired the shots. We're left with the horrendous conclusion and takeaway message that both state and IRA were co-conspirators in the murder of some of its citizens. This finding ought to present as a strong riposte to any naysayers critical of Kenova for the £40 million price tag and the time and resources expended in reaching this point today. There would have been no cost at all had the state not operated an utterly dysfunctional policing system in the oversight of the Stakeknife project. Any blaming for the cost of this inquiry rests with the British government. There is an obvious parallel with other Troubles-related investigations. You can never put a price on the cost of exposing the truth in circumstances where, in turn, vast cost has been deployed in suppressing the truth. The decision not to name Fred Stakeknife as the agent Stakeknife has been difficult for many to accept. The legal and technical rationale for doing so will be lost on many people, particularly next of kin of those murdered. We are encouraged by the prospect of a completely changed position at some stage in the near future. Given the very specific nature of the terms of reference, it was annoying that Fred Stakeknife could not be named as the agent Stakeknife in this report today. The report does make it very clear, by inference or otherwise, that Stakeknife was the agent Stakeknife. But for many, it's important to see his name, as it were, go up in lights as Stakeknife. For many, the Kenova engagement has been all about finding out whether or not a relative was a tout. At best, this absence has been underwhelming, and at worst, it has actually been re-traumatising for families.
Well, that was Solicitor Kevin Winters talking on behalf of some of the families. Well, let's get some political reaction now and go live to Stormont and to our political editor, Enda McClafferty. So, Enda, what did you make of the statement from the government that Julian mentioned earlier?
Well, no great surprise, Kerry. The government has acknowledged the fact that this is an interim report and it wants to reserve full judgment, if you like, until the full report is actually published at some stage in the future. The government, though, making it very clear in terms of the fact that there was no prosecutions that flowed from the Kenova report, points to what they've been saying all along about the great difficulty in securing prosecutions, and in a sense uses that to support its argument around its own legacy proposals. But in truth, these questions are not going away from the government, not least, of course, the actions and the behaviours of some of those involved in the security services. And John Boucher was very clear that he felt that there had to be an apology from government, but not just from Chris Heaton-Harris, the Secretary of State, but from the Prime Minister himself at the very highest level. Now, in truth, we don't know when this full report is going to be published, but we may well find ourselves with a new government at that time, with perhaps a new person in number 10.
And Sinn Féin held a response just within the last half hour. What was their reaction?
Well, John Boucher was also clear today that he felt there were big questions today for the current Republican leadership. While he said there were serious questions to answer for the security services, says the ultimate blame lay with Republicans, lay with the IRA's members, of course, who pulled the trigger. But he did have a challenge for the current Sinn Féin leadership to come out and apologise for what has happened and to go further and say what happened was wrong. So a short time ago, I put that very point to Michelle O'Neill. I asked her directly if she felt that the murder of alleged informants was wrong, and if she felt now was the time to say sorry to their families. And this was her response.
Yes, I've said it before and I will repeat it again today. For all those families out there that lost a loved one, I am sorry for every single loss of life, and that is without exception. That's for every person who was hurt or impacted by our conflict. And I think it's important that today, as the Sinn Féin new generation, Good Friday Agreement generation leader, that I will repeat that for those families. And I hope, can only hope, because this is ultimately their day, that they can take some comfort from that.
Michelle O'Neill also made it clear today that she didn't know Freddie Stakeknife, and she was also asked specifically about the chances of some sort of statement from the IRA, whether or not the families are going to get an apology from the IRA, as what John Boucher, of course, demanded. Her response to that was, well, the IRA no longer exists, so she felt it was not really a question for her. But she did say something very interesting, though, I think, in her opening address, where she talked about Republicans out there cannot disown the political violence of the past, and I think that is as close as she came today to acknowledgement, of course, of wrongdoing by the Republicans back in the day.
And any response from any of the other local political parties, Enda?
Well, we've had a statement from the DUP leader, Sir Geoffrey Donaldson, making it clear that there are lessons to be learned for the security services out of the Kenova report, but making it very clear also that the ultimate blame, of course, must rest with Republicans, saying that 90% of deaths in Northern Ireland during the Troubles were the responsibility of terrorists and not the security forces. He also talked as well about the Public Prosecution Service and about the questions that need to be raised there. The fact that John Boucher today was so critical around what the Public Prosecution Service was able and not able to do in terms of this investigation, and that for Sir Geoffrey Donaldson raises some very, very serious questions. We also heard today from the SDLP leader, Colm Eastwood, and this is what he had to say earlier.
It makes very difficult reading. What it really tells us is the truth about what actually went on, and never mind all the myths. And when what we see today is war crimes really sanctioned by the IRA Army Council and the British government. And all of that was allowed to happen. It's pretty clear now that very senior levels of the IRA were totally infiltrated by the British government, and they both allowed these heinous crimes to go unpunished.
Just finally, we've had a statement as well within the past few minutes from the Taoiseach Micheál Martin saying that this proves again how reports like this need to be victim-centred, and he says this report also raises serious questions for the current Sinn Féin leadership.
Enda McClafferty, thank you.